Joining us now is Tal Eslick, a Central Valley political analyst, to talk more about the results so far and kind of what we saw once those polls closed, not just in Kern County and in California, but across the nation. Tal, thanks so much for joining us.
Good morning.
I just want to get your reaction to what we saw last night. The polls, we're talking polls from more conservative outlets to more liberal outlets, kind of coming up with the same narrative, is that it is going to be a close race. And sure enough, if you're looking at the popular vote, it is close, but still, former President Trump being elected the 47th president of the United States. Talk a little bit about what you saw last night, what you think really stands out, especially when you compare what we're seeing right now to 2020 and 2016.
Yeah, so the energy you saw kind of move from, I think, folks on the Democratic side that were feeling, I think, better about the election as it got closer to, I think, acceptance that it was going to be what appears to be at this moment a Republican wave across the country, right? I do think there were a number of voters that maybe they even responded to polls in a certain way, and then they got into the ballot box and were able to sort of pull the rhetoric aside a little bit, and in my estimation, really voted on the inflation issue, right? So the economy is how it would probably show up in a poll, but the fact that they, go to the grocery store and they spend $160 and it used to be $80, that resonates with people, and I think in private, many of them, a number of them voted for former President Trump over Vice President Harris because of an indictment of the Biden administration.
Can we talk about demographics? Because it always comes up in elections, right? And one of the demographics that we usually talk about when it comes to race, or these races, are the Latino vote, the black vote, and then there's also the gender vote. Men versus women. We really saw these demographics kind of surprise a lot of people. People who are used to seeing, the Democrats usually taking the Latino vote and so forth. And there's a lot of talk about the gender divide in this election. What's going on here? Why are we seeing all of these kind of surprises, especially for people who are not used to following this?
If you look at a state like Florida, where you have a Cuban population that historically has actually voted fairly conservative and is now, beginning to, I would say, more reflect the rest of the state in that particular place. In California, you have a Latino vote, mostly Mexican folks, maybe some folks from Central America. That demographic is beginning to more reflect the nation. I think it's a good thing for our country if we focus less on the color of people's skin as relates to expecting how they're going to vote, and talk to them as voters on issues they care about.
What about gender?
Genders, that was, I think, the Democrats' decision to really focus on the life issue and reproductive rights towards the end of the campaign. I do think what they did is maybe a bit of an over-rotation, where you had that message being delivered mostly to women, and then it turns out that younger men may have been the sort of surprise of this election that usually vote in low or mid propensity. Many of those folks voted, kind of the Joe Rogan voter, I guess, for lack of a better term.
A lot of people are saying the bro vote.
The bro vote, yeah.
Let's talk about the results here in Kern County and what we're seeing and what that tells us about these demographics of the Central Valley voter. Trump pulling ahead with 60% of the vote so far here in Kern County. That's more than 2020 and 2016. Of course, it's going to change as we go forward and get more results. But does that surprise you at all? Does it tell you anything about some changing demographics here in the Central Valley of voters?
Yeah, so Kern County has always been a sort of red spot in a deeper blue state, obviously. I do think some of those low and mid propensity voters that showed up will, bring those numbers beyond what 2020 and certainly maybe even 2016, right? The life issue, the national issues, I do think will ultimately be a hindrance for really in the 22nd congressional district, because again, it's a nuanced issue. Immigration and the life issue are different in the San Joaquin Valley than the rest of the country, because we have an ag workforce that in many cases is not with appropriate documents. And we do have socially conservative Hispanic voters, including women, that the life issue is a little bit more complicated for them. So I think the national focus on that was not helpful to some of the Democratic congressional candidates in our region.
Yeah, so the 22nd congressional district has not been called, but we do see Republican Valadeo pulling ahead of Democrat Rudy Salas. What do we expect to see in this race going forward as more votes come in and are counted?
So historically, the late votes would sway very heavily towards Democrats' provisional ballots. I remember in 2016, certainly 2018, 80-20, where they were going towards the Democratic candidate and away from, at the time, Congressman Valadeo. However, in the last two cycles, many Republicans hold their ballots back. So they're concerned about the election, or they don't want to put it in the mail, and they drop it off at a polling place. So that's sort of made it a little bit more mild, that split. So I don't think you're going to see much of a change. And a 10-point margin on election night, 2018, which is what Valadeo has now. 2018, he was up, I believe, 6%. When everyone went to bed, and then you saw that narrow, and eventually he lost by a small number of votes. So I think 10's a pretty healthy margin. I don't see what could change profile-wise for the remaining ballots, and at this point, no one knows how many ballots are even left in Kern County. I don't think it's been released.
I want to talk really quick before we run out of time. We talk about how there are two parties in the country, right? Republicans, Democrats. We're seeing that here in Kern County. We're seeing Bakersfield as more of a leaning blue city. The county as a whole, leans right. But there's a third group of people that you're seeing that's just really increasing, the NPPs, the no party preference voters. Who are these people, and how are they voting? Yeah,
so I, as an NPP voter myself, it's unfortunate that we have 50 options for toothpaste, but 2 for political parties, right? So I think it's going to continue to be a growing demographic, and I think it's a group that, especially as you look at those low and mid-propensity voters that showed up in this presidential election, are going to matter more. And maybe that changes, maybe all of our rhetoric isn't so divisive, and it's speaking to folks in the middle, that 40% of people that just want to go to work every day and raise their family and have a little fun on the weekend. We should probably be talking to them in a different way, and I hope both parties get that message, either because they're happy they won on the Republican side or because they need to refocus their efforts on the Democratic side after last night.
Tal Eslick, thank you so much for joining us this morning for your analysis.
All right, appreciate it.